llama Lucas.
4:45 p.m.
No,
Tiempo universal coordinado.
ni la señora de
Regístrate en el
Gana.
siguiente link de la
Está mal,
plataforma
está el
de
chao
indicar
Richie.
o
Mejor
conéctate.
no darles acceso porque pueden ser hackers. Oye, yo le dije a la chica de la mente.
Vuelve ODS en 3, 2, 1. Pacto Global Colombia y Canal Zoom te invitan a conocer los 17 Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible a través de las cápsulas pedagógicas ODS en 3, 2, 1. Conoce un nuevo ODS todos los viernes a través de nuestra señal de televisión y redes sociales.
ODS en 3, 2, 1. Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible número 6. Agua limpia y saneamiento. ¿Sabías que el 40% de la población mundial se ve afectada por la escasez de agua? Si el calentamiento global continúa, la cifra va a aumentar. En el último siglo, el mundo ha perdido el 70% de sus zonas húmedas naturales, y es por esto que el ODS número 6 es fundamental. Este busca que las 844 millones de personas que aún carecen de agua potable básica tengan acceso a esta. Pero para lograrlo es necesario realizar inversiones adecuadas en infraestructura, proporcionar instalaciones sanitarias y fomentar prácticas de higiene. ¿Y tú? ¿Qué acciones llevas a cabo para lograr las metas de los ODS? ODS en 3, 2, 1. ODS en 3, 2, 1. Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible número 7. Energía asequible y no contaminante. Hasta el día de hoy, 1 de cada 7 personas aún no tiene acceso a la electricidad, y la mayoría de ellos vive en áreas rurales. A pesar de que el número de personas sin energía bajó a poco menos de 1.000 millones, con el aumento poblacional la demanda de energía accesible va a seguir incrementando. Es por esto que el ODS número 7 busca un equilibrio entre energía accesible para todos y una conciencia medioambiental, pues la energía es uno de los grandes contribuyentes al cambio climático. Y para lograrlo es necesario invertir en fuentes de energía limpia, como la solar, eólica y termal, y mejorar la productividad energética. ¿Y tú, qué acciones llevas a cabo para lograr las metas de los ODS? ODS en 3, 2, 1. ODS en 3, 2, 1. Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible número 8. Trabajo decente y crecimiento económico. Durante los últimos 25 años, la cantidad de trabajadores que viven en condiciones de pobreza extrema ha disminuido drásticamente, pese al impacto de la crisis económica de 2008 y las recesiones globales. Actualmente, en los países en desarrollo, la clase media representa hoy más del 34% del empleo total, una cifra que casi se triplicó entre 1991 y 2015. Sin embargo, para 2018 se estimó que 172 millones de personas en todo el mundo estuvieron sin trabajo, una tasa de desempleo del 5%. En ese sentido, como resultado de la expansión de la fuerza laboral, se proyectó que la cantidad de desempleados aumentaría en 1 millón cada año y alcanzaría los 174 millones para este 2020. Es por esto que fomentar políticas que estimulen el espíritu empresarial y la creación de empleo es crucial para lograr trabajo decente para todos y crecimiento económico, así como también las medidas eficaces para erradicar el trabajo forzoso, la esclavitud y el tráfico humano. Con estas metas, el objetivo es lograr empleo pleno y productivo y un trabajo decente para todos los hombres y mujeres para 2030. ¿Y tú, qué acciones llevas a cabo para lograr las metas de los ODS? ODS en 3, 2, 1.
Llega la versión virtual 2020 del Foro Mundial de Datos, organizado por las Naciones Unidas. Una extensa red de socios de los gobiernos, del sector privado, de la sociedad civil, del sistema de las Naciones Unidas y de las comunidades científicas y académicas que colaborarán en el intercambio de conocimientos sobre datos y las estadísticas, presentando nuevas tecnologías y celebrando compromisos en el marco de la Agenda Global para la Medición del Desarrollo Sostenible. En esta edición, no te puedes perder el conversatorio organizado por la Fundación GeoCensos, en donde grandes expertos nos contarán sobre plataformas de datos geoespaciales abiertos que mejor funcionaron en medio de la pandemia y cómo la sociedad civil se involucró en el desafío. Nos vemos este 19 de octubre a las 3:30 p.m., 4:45 p.m., tiempo universal coordinado. Regístrate en el siguiente link de la plataforma Attendify o conéctate por el canal de YouTube del canal universitario Nacional Zoom.
Vuelve ODS en 3, 2.
ODS en 3, 2, 1. Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible número 8. Trabajo decente y crecimiento económico. Durante los últimos 25 años, la cantidad de trabajadores que viven en condiciones de pobreza extrema ha disminuido drásticamente.
Good morning, good afternoon, good night in the rest of the world. Welcome to our TA 503 session about learning from geospatial data platform that worked amidst the pandemic. We are present here for all attendants and participants that are interested in those topics related to the use of geospatial data and its articulation through the NSOs in the world that have worked amidst the pandemic. We're really happy to receive you here, and we would like to share a few insights in facilitation. If our operator would share the next slide, please. We'll be going through the context of all our speakers, which I might mention further in next minutes. Right now, what I wanted to motivate you about is regarding a certain, please, let's say on the motivation slide, and let's see that most of the people that attended our last tweet chat of the program that was run with the World Data Forum organizers and the Secretariat were referred to the quality and also to the disaggregation and granularity of data regarding geospatial hubs that work in the pandemic. It was a teacher that was run previously in past month that had the participation of many companies and also NGOs and other participants from sectors such as ESRI and also Open Data Watch. Let's see the next slide, please, where we will be seeing that our idea of summoning for this session is that we went through the different targets that Goal 17 has, and we learn how to build partnership regarding those enunciations. Among others, these targets, what they do is to ask for the participation not only from governments and among different agencies of governments, but also from the civil society and the academic data community and also the private sector and the international organizations that have data that could be shared. If we check the next slide, we will see that these possibilities that we were speaking about are combining different actors, such as the citizenry represented by Yasin in that graph we are sharing, and also the government and also businesses to simplify the analysis. If we happen to see some of the examples, for instance, a typical case, previous slides, please. If we happen to see an example, the B2B kind of combination regards the LinkedIn and Facebook sharing of data that is among the different actors of businesses, because it's companies with another company that provides the service of sharing the platform. But also we could find some cases from civil society to governments, like the one we saw in Uganda through UESO and also in Kenya and also in Eastern countries. Next slide, please. Now we go there. And what we saw in reality when the COVID was breaking up is the many different initiatives that were performed to find partnership between governments, also governmental agencies, but also the private sector. In this case, the GSS from Ghana, the NSOs from Ghana, participated and showed an initiative with the business sector, the Vodafone telephone company, that allowed to do that, to share data and to provide them in a geospatial platform that greatly helped for the decisions regarding the COVID response. So other cases would be worthwhile to highlight in, for instance, Colombia, where a vulnerability index was performed and was constructed, an index that was formed with data from 2018 surveys from the health ministry and also from the census. Another case to highlight was the one from Ghana I was mentioning before, and also one from Eurostat that calculated the travel time to health services, combining the data from different governments of the European Union. You know, the European Union is this association of different countries that do have different data and do have the same standard through let's say the regional statistical office that is the one from Eurostat. So if we follow up with the slides, I don't know if in control we can find a solution to the freezing of the slides. Something might have been glitching there, but anyway, our next speaker, allow me to introduce him, is Stigma Philly, who is chief statistician from UNTAD and who has worked a lot through different issues related to the data needed for the geospatial information framework. I guess I have it right. Please, Steve, let us know.
Great, thanks everybody, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this session of the World Data Forum. So I'm going to speak very briefly about a paper myself and a colleague wrote, Boyan Nastav, called You Say You Want a Data Revolution, which investigates how to harness statistics that have been produced by other communities outside of the official statistics tent. So next slide, please. So it's useful to start by looking back at the last World Data Forum. So at the conclusion of the World Data Forum in 2018, we published together the Dubai Declaration. And in that declaration, we agreed that data demands for the 2030 agenda require urgent and new solutions that leverage the power of new data sources, new technologies, new partnerships between NSOs, and all of the other data ecosystems, so private sector, civil society, citizen science, and so on. And really the question leaving that for us was, well, okay, that's the aspiration. Now the question is, how do we do that? We all know we want to do it, but how do we forge these partnerships in a way that we all feel comfortable? The other reason we wrote the paper, next slide please, is actually when we look at the SDGs, we get a sense of what we've achieved, but also what's left to achieve. So if you look at back in the start of 2000 or the end of 2016, only 35% of the SDG indicators were tier 1, meaning that we had a conceptual framework for those statistics, but we also had the data. And while we've made very significant progress on tier 3 and tier 2, now after 5 years, we still have roughly only half of the indicators can be populated. So in other words, we still have a big job to do. And at this stage, I think a lot of the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So the next couple of years are going to be tougher because now we're really going to have to work hard to populate these extra indicators. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide, please. So what we've proposed is this is one approach. I'm sure there's many other approaches, but this really summarizes the core argument in the paper that's cited at the bottom of the slide. And basically what we say is national statistical offices, they use data all the time. They use unofficial data, but they typically don't use unofficial statistics. And this is an important distinction that we're making. So we're looking at not only how to harness unofficial data, but also statistics. And then we argue that we could establish an accreditation system either at the national level, which would be done at the National Statistical System level, or at the global level, which could be done either by a UN entity or by the IAG SDG. And they could be mandated to accredit statistics coming in from the geospatial community, for example. They would be certified as being fit for purpose. And that increases then our pool of data and statistics available for populating the SDG indicators. Next slide, please. So just to give you one example, I've taken this slide from a paper from some friends of mine, and they're citizen science. And what they've done is they've mapped out how they've tested how citizen science can contribute to the SDG indicators. So all of the yellow indicators or cells are cells where they say citizen science can contribute. And for the green cells, these are where they are already contributing. So next slide. So given that this is a geospatial community, if we look at 11.3.1, that's the ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate. Now that's a tier 2 indicator, which means conceptually we know what it means, but we don't have enough data to populate a global indicator. And yet we have another community, the citizen science community, saying we can actually supply data to populate that indicator. And to me, the question then is, well, why don't we investigate this and see, well, if they say they have the data, we don't have the data. Let's look at a partnership. Let's make sure the data are fit for purpose. Let's make sure they're good quality data. And if they are, then why not use them? And that, in summary, is our proposal. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. Our upcoming speaker would be Olga Henker from Global Colombia Certification, that has also a base in Mexico, and will explain us about what about if we try to certificate through the traditional system. Go ahead, Olga, please.
Thank you. Morning, afternoon, and night for everyone in the world. Thanks, audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the opportunity to address you raise our idea on the mechanism for data certification. Who's next? So I'm part of the Global Certification, a conformity assessment body. We focus on standards as quality, anti-bribery, information security, data quality, data in geographic systems, and user safety, among others. As can be seen, our focus and experience are oriented to quality in many dimensions, applying to government and government data agencies especially. So let's talk about certification. Certification is a matter of confidence. We will see why this concept is so important. Certifiers get accreditation to certify on behalf of the body delegated by the government. We can mention EMA in Mexico or ONAC in Colombia. Accreditation bodies ensure that conformity assessment bodies are reliable, impartial, competent, and technically solvent. So what does this mean? That the mechanism to ensure the competence of a conformity assessment body to certify a product of a service exists, has been tested, worked, and it's a great mechanism to democratize quality. An example is the biosafety certification in Colombia. In some cities, municipalities, or health secretariats check, for example, that a hotel complies with biosafety conditions. But this doesn't prevent that hotel from going to a CAD and obtain its certification. In turn, this certification is endorsed by the ministry. The same, our idea, can be done with the data. Then, why are we talking about data certification? Please, next. Data certification. COVID has demonstrated that comprehensive, reliable, and readily available data are critical resources to address the pandemic. How? For pandemic managing, as a consumption, very important, as a consumption basic need for society through media, as, as an input to accelerate the digital transformation and enable business continuity. And of course, we count with data certification frameworks as ISO 19115, among others. So, knowing its importance already evidenced, it is essential to have reliable data. Please, next. So, we are seeing again the Mr. McFeely work. Our idea is based on their job, very important, and because we are a great fan of his job. And our case is based, as I said, on this paper. You say you want a data revolution, a proposal for use on official statistics for the SDG Global Indicators Framework. And also in Javier Carranza's proposals in previous events such as CEPAL in the last year. In itself, as we can see, the use of certificate data from unofficial sources is very innovative. We add our idea that the certifier is not the NSS or the IEAG SDG because, as I mentioned, the product and service certification mechanisms already exist. We suggest that this certification be given by the conformity assessment bodies in order to democratize data quality. This certification will be made by the conformity assessment body with technical experts from NSS or IEAG SDG. The paper also says that it should be a measure of last resort and only considered when all other official options have been exhausted. Thus is a contingency measure, but we suggest it as a mitigated measure. This initiative, implemented, will strengthen the culture of data quality. For this reason, we suggest that action to prepare the world stage for this scenario should be initiated as soon as possible. The subject of data certification, for example, in the case of 115, is still in incipient stages in the NSOs themselves. So if we don't start at once, the goal may not be reached, as Mr. McFeely have said in other occasions. So, please, next. We have concluded ideas. Okay, so action proposal in relation to quality have one characteristic. This is very important. They sound very simple, even obvious. This is a problem with quality. Everything sounds very easy, but the implementation may not be like that. So, mitigation actions will be implemented departing from collaborative arrangement with different data sources in order to implement process and product certification. Interdisciplinary working groups should review the standards for data quality to ensure that they meet the needs revealed by the pandemic or the SDGs. Certification will be supported by conformity assessment bodies previously with license for the government or the entities delegated by the government, considering the advice of the NSO. We need to democratize the quality of data. Anticipating an
Please,
imminent
Olga,
data revolution.
it's 2 minutes to go, okay?
Okay, thank you. Anticipating the imminent data revolution, NSO should commit themselves to promote the culture of certification, not only focusing in the product, but also in the processes. Believe us, trust can be ensured through the government processes. This is possible. And finally, as usual, participation of civil society in these processes should be prioritized mostly because transparency of the results is a major issue. Really, it's a major issue. So, next, please. Thanks for listening to me. Thanks for your attention and thanks a lot.
Hello, thank you, Javier Carranza, for the invitation. Thank you to GeoCensos for the organization, and thank you for to the other speaker and all participants. I don't see the next slide. You can see the next slide.
Please, Laura, could you show us again the slides? We lost the image. I'm taking advantage of this small glitch to let know our audience that might be kind of lost because of some technical issues we were experiencing that were out of our reach, but we can see that people are asking to join through the session in the Attendify platform. For those that have the fortunate luck to be on YouTube, we are going to take anyway all your questions through the chat boxes that are made available through the Attendify platform. So the official way of asking something would be through Attendify, so that we can have the record there of your question, and we can also follow up in the future. And also we'll be having the Slido platform checked by our control manager that will be checking all those handlers that we already promoted, like hashtag mapping the change and also hashtag learning from COVID. Silvia, we're waiting for your slide whenever you like to. Thank you. Right now you can see it, Luca?
Yes. I'm going to speak about official statistics and COVID, that of course is very hot topics. Also this morning during the UN Data Forum, they spoke about this topic that is crucial in this moment. This is a little bit a recap of a couple of articles that I wrote about. Can I have the next slide, please? This pandemic that started in January create many problems to the official statistics, because the production of data was problematic because the response rate of the survey, of course, in some case decreased dramatically. Another thing was that the model, all the data, the forecasting were completely changed from the previous data. The National Statistical Office couldn't use anymore the same model, the same pattern, because the pandemic break this pattern. Of course, another issue was that the government changed completely the priority. Then all the statistics affected by the policy, the public policy was completely changed. Then we saw postponement and cancellation in the calendar, in the calendar of the official statistics. Can I see the next one? Then, in my opinion, this pandemic for the official statistics, for the national office, is and was an incredible opportunity to improve some tool, some dynamic, some let's say tradition. For instance, the demographic data that, of course, thanks unfortunately to the pandemic, the demographic data was very interesting to understand the dimension of the COVID. This data, normally we know that sometimes we need to expect 5 years in some case to have the revised data. Sometimes 2 years, sometimes 1 year. What we observe, thanks to the COVID, that now we have demographic data update to every week, almost in some case. Then this say us that it's possible to have update data, and next is possible to have a more granular source of data. The next presentation of timers will speak about granular source of data. Another thing that was very important, it was a big improvement, was the interview method. Of course, in some case, we had a personal interview or computer assisted interview. Now, of course, like a little bit in everywhere, we observed that we had web interview. I think this digitalization process of the National Statistical Office was very, very important. Can I see the next slide, please? Then, also, in my opinion, the National Statistical Office, that I think is completely crucial for democracy, need to be more present to check the fake news and to check the information. The Statistical Office is an independent body of the state that need to be more present on the quality of statistics and data, also if these data they don't come from the National Statistical Office. Then I think National Statistical Office has the aggregation of all the information about COVID, the health, the economy, to really be crucial, let's say, point in this COVID situation. Also, is time to shift the attention of statistics from offer to demand. And to conclude, in the next slide, can I see the next slide? I'm going to conclude this COVID can be a motor, an engine to convert bureaucratic, sometimes tradition in the statistical office, procedure, routine, to convert this in update data, analysis, modeling, experimental statistics, digitalization, and to be more close to the people, and also granular source of data that we will see in the next presentation. To conclude, I think it's very important that the National Statistical Office is very important for the democracy, because we have there a lot of information that is useful for the people to judge the government, to judge the health system, to judge all the policy that we have in our society. And thank you, and I will listen the next speaker.
Okay, thank you for that enlightening presentation, Luca. We are really thrilled about knowing what was your analysis, and also to find the linkage to the next speaker. I want to welcome all those participants that were looking to join us before. We're unfortunately experiencing some technical issues, but this was solved, and I can let know other speakers and also other participants that we are also live on YouTube, on the Canal Zoom TV channel for the Hispanic audience, but also for everyone. And also we are right now live on Attendify. So we welcome Beth Timmers from IISD that will enlighten us regarding the issues that are more referred to granularity of data, how they are linked to our topic today. I must say that regarding what other speakers of this session were involved in, the tracking tool progress that Beth will be presenting us will be really important, and also complement to other sessions that were already offered here, where the citizen science contributions were analyzed. So thank you very much, Beth, for joining us, and please go ahead. Next slide, please.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm presenting from Winnipeg, Canada. And this is where the headquarters of the International Institute for Sustainable Development is. Today, I'm going to be presenting on the role of more granular community data in charting a sustainable and equitable pandemic recovery. And thank you so much for having me at the World Data Forum today with these other great presenters. So before I get into the slides, just go back to the previous title slide. I want to begin by acknowledging the tension that comes up in discussions between official data that comes from national statistical offices and the unofficial data and statistics that can come from civil society or the community level, and suggest a way to reconcile this dichotomy. So in my presentation today, I'll offer one way to heed Steve McFeely's call that he outlined in the opening presentation to this session to leverage community expertise to fill some of those data gaps that we're seeing in the official realm. I suggest that communities are really the experts on how shocks, for example, COVID-19, are impacting them. I'll present one option to support community level data that is of high quality that can complement the official data that's already out there to design recovery interventions. To collate data deemed important by communities, here at the ISD, we've developed a digital platform called Tracking Progress that you can see in the slide here. This platform includes data and statistics that might draw from official sources, but it also might not. Tracking Progress can help to address some of the quality concerns over community or citizen data complementing the data that is from NSOs. So in the presentation today, I'm first going to introduce Tracking Progress and then offer two examples of its application so far. So first from here in Winnipeg, where we collate data to understand my community's well-being, and then another example from our partners in India who are collecting new, exciting, and important data on the well-being of different groups who are oppressed or made vulnerable. Both examples show how starting with the community's perspective can help to reveal what official and non-official data is important to track well-being, or also some of the pandemic's impacts. So Tracking Progress enables communities to easily visualize progress on issues that matter to them. Our sites all around the world share key indicators of community well-being that can use different data sources that are displayed as charts, graphs, or some of the maps that you see here from our sites. And these allow citizens and decision makers to both gauge progress over time really quickly, but also to better advocate for evidence-based policy. We intentionally designed this tool to be easily replicable in any community, also at a low cost, to help provide local or granular evidence of well-being over time. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is an example of our oldest site in Winnipeg, Canada, that we run in partnership with the United Way of Winnipeg. This site tracks progress on 8 different thematic areas that Winnipeggers chose themselves to represent the community's overall well-being. So the map in the corner shows an example of one of our indicators, median household income. This map, you can see, clearly shows some income inequality across different neighborhoods, and this is drawing on data from our NSO, Statistics Canada. Our site complements this type of official data with citizen-gathered statistics on things like people's experience with homelessness or people's participation in the arts, among other types of statistics. And all of these indicators were deemed important in our community through an intentional process that's outlined in the wheel to the right. So first we engage in multi-stakeholder consultations, then choose relevant indicators, whether they be official or not. Regardless, all of these indicators go through a quality assurance process. Then we move on to communicate this data to engage in data democratization and the wider use of it. And this leads to various types of evidence-based impacts. Now, a process like this is going to be even more important as COVID and the associated lockdowns impact our communities. There's a recent study done by the city of Winnipeg that analyzes the impacts of COVID on our city, finding that specific populations, including low-income populations, our large urban indigenous population, and people with disabilities will be harmed by the pandemic in deeper ways. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to move on to a different example of our site based on our international Leaving No One Behind project. This is part of a bigger partnership led by the International Civil Society and many other partners. And for more information on this, please check out our virtual exhibit at the World Data Forum. The number is SP.2018, or you can go to our new website, voicescount.org. So one part of this coalition in India is headed by a national campaign called Wadanatodo Abhiyan. It's a platform that brings together a huge amount, over 4,000 civil society organizations across India to collect SDG-related data from 20 groups who are left out of official statistics. So notably, some of these groups include scheduled and vulnerable castes, vulnerable children, young people, the elderly, transgender people, and people with disabilities. And you can see in the 2 graphs I've included here that indicate each group of interests that they experience different things like household income on the left or internet access in incredibly different ways. Thus, it's really crucial to collect data that's disaggregated by these specific groups. And just to note that we're also working with one partner development initiatives to ensure that this data is of high quality and that also respects anonymization and other aspects of data privacy. So both of these examples show how it's crucial to disaggregate data according to different groups of people who experience marginalization in very different ways. And this understanding will be so important to chart an equitable pandemic recovery. And the next slide, please. Oh, I just had one concluding slide that's not there, but I'll just note that through applications of tracking progress, we're able to share different kinds of data and statistics that are deemed important by communities that also go through a quality assurance process. So this will allow citizen data to complement existing data from NSOs. This information will be essential to fill information gaps and understand some of the expected, but also the unexpected impacts of the pandemic in people's lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beth, for your great presentation. We had a certain coordination issue there because of the slides, but it should be solved. Anyway, they will be uploaded to the site of our session, so everyone will be sharing what you prepared for us, and thank you for understanding this slight miscoordination. And finally, but not last, well, last but not least, Mrs. Grace Bediako, coming from Accra, from Ghana in Accra, will be speaking to us about the issues related to the experience that they ran in a government to business data partnership together with a telecommunications company. And if you would allow me to share with you, this presentation is really look forward for, because we have been trying to get connections to many NSOs that have been working in this. So we really welcome your presence here, Mrs. Bediako. Please go ahead. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Good day to everybody. Happy to be here sharing with you a brief account of government working with public, private sector and development partners to exploit otherwise unorganized data to assist or support policy monitoring. Next slide, please. The main points that we're going to highlight would be the fact that we're producing national call detail records, mobility maps from call detail records. It became possible because existing data partnerships were exploited. And we're also producing spatial vulnerability analysis based on regular statistical data, but really delving down into more granular form, or being more with responsive data partners. Both examples have assisted us in the knowledge brokering to decision makers, and has led to the inclusion of NSO, that's the Ghana Statistical Service, on the table for policy decisions. Otherwise, previously, I mean, in a situation like the COVID, the data issues would not be so prominent, but this time it was. Now, in early March, we decided to do this mobility analysis using data that the telecommunication, in this case, Vodafone, had been collecting. The project actually started in 2019, but in March 2020, and many will recall, that is when Ghana had its first case, the first 2 cases of coronavirus infection. The reports were then published on 3rd April during the lockdown. So we had a lockdown at the end of March, going into April. we will see that Ghana acted, DSS acted as the coordinator during this process because the data were analyzed by other agencies. Our partners were the Flowminder and Vodafone Ghana. And the project was funded by Hewlett Foundation and the Vodafone Group, the international group. The project was by using telecommunication data, which is geotagged to the GPS locations of telephone masts. We were able to capture spatially disaggregated mobility flows in near real time. That's about 48-hour time lag. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we see that the initial map that we have was from 17th February to 15th March. It covered a period where we did not have any virus or policy restricting movement. Between 16th and 29th March was when you see it's really the baseline, more or less. So that shows, the second map shows the near normal movement around the country and among districts, between two districts. Then comes the lockdown, 30th of March, and you will see the third map. It shows the lockdown restricted movement from Greater Accra, which is the deep red in the southernmost part, and then Ashanti region, which is the other deep section of the map. But it was really, the restriction was Kumasi, which is the capital of the Ashanti region, and Accra, Greater Accra region. You find that within that period, of the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the lockdown, you have these two areas, and you will see movement between two districts was drastically reduced by 50 to 60%, which is the lower legend. And in others, the areas close to Greater Accra were also affected because it would seem that these are the normal movement, but it was greatly affected. So many of them 30 to 40% reduction, even though the lockdown was not in these other regions. Then at the post-lockdown, when the lockdown was eased for us and people could move anywhere, you say they were slow to pick up. So even in Greater Accra, surrounding regions, and then Ashanti region, which is the central, the center part, you see that the reduction of movements relative to the initial pattern was 30 to 40%. Now, this tells us also how the policy of the lockdown was complied with by citizens. You see that in the initial, there was real restriction and people complied. And then post-lockdown, there was still an unease. So the movement was still slow and reduced. But we can see that there was a change. Now, as I indicated, this became possible because we had earlier started working with these partners, Vodafone and Flowminder, Hewlett, and Foundation, to use call detail records. We also had a statistical act, which was enacted in 2019, which actually made it possible for us to exploit big data the data
Sorry,
of the
next
kind.
slide, please.
Next slide that we are talking about. So the second example that, yeah, this one is this is a second example of how we use spatial data. Here, it wasn't all big data. It wasn't big data at all. We used data from our regular surveys, like the multiple indicator cluster survey, which is done every 5 years, and the demographic and health survey, which is also done every 5 years, but interspaced between the mixed surveys, and then the labor force survey. These three sources combined and using we had a partner, the frame, a technical partner which worked with GeoCensos to use machine learning to estimate vulnerability characteristics at 1 square kilometer resolution across the country. It's almost like small area data, but this one to the lowest level. So it was 1 square kilometer. And you see the map in the middle shows the areas where you have the deep blue is an area where you have 500, more than 500 households not having access to water for hand washing. You may recall that the protocol for COVID-19 prevention or containment required that people would use water, running water, and soap for hand washing. Water was delivered to the areas where there was no running water, and these maps helped to isolate these particular areas for government to supply these maps. The next slide, please. Sorry, government to supply the water. So this presented opportunities and challenges for timely evidence generation in a case where speedy interventions were required to contain a rather deadly spread of a disease. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So from this project, we have published 2 reports raising the profile of the data for good project. I must say this project comes under the umbrella of interventions that the global sustainable data initiative covers. And so the 2 reports, one on insights into the effects of mobility restrictions in Ghana using anonymized and aggregated mobile phone data. And I must emphasize that the dissemination was also the catalyst to the inclusion of GSS in the new policy space, such as the National Technical Coordinating Committee on COVID-19, which was chaired by the Ministry, which is chaired by the Ministry of Health and the Minister of Health, and convened by the Office of the President. And well, we would have liked to say that it has brought significant policy change, but it's too early to say that. But we know that these data have been requested, and we have also had requests for partnerships and the sharing of data at the national level as well as internationally. So we hope that as we go along, we can demonstrate further how useful these big data and other data that are otherwise unorganized and we can demonstrate the purpose. But fundamentally, I think the geospatial data, presenting this data in a geospatial fashion, allows people to identify closely with the data. They can situate themselves exactly where things are happening, and makes statistics a lot more attractive to the ordinary citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bediaco, for your intervention, for your presentation. I think that according to our team, this was one of the slides that Beth Timmers was mentioning, that we convert in one together with the data of the projects that come from Statistic Ghana. I really appreciate Mrs. Bediaco's intervention, because she mentioned a very important topic and very important corner of the analysis, is that people feel interpreted by statistics. This is a real important issue, and that's why that from GeoCensos and other organizations, we have been advocating for the formation of data partnerships. In fact, we are actively working out the global statistical geospatial framework in several low and middle income countries, where this participation of third party sources, especially on the geospatial side, will be helping everyone to understand better how to integrate statistics with data. So I think the goal was completed here, and we're really proud from GeoCensos, and also I guess from the other partners and stakeholders we have invited to the session. And right now I would like to invite everyone for opening the floor for questions and answers. Regarding previous slides, please, if you like. Regarding the participation, no, this one, yes, thank you. Regarding the participation of Dr. Enrique Peláez from University of Córdoba, and also from the CONICET, our research institution from Argentina, he will be moderating all the insights from the questions from the chat box that unfortunately couldn't collect those that were at the beginning. So you have the floor, Enrique, to explain us which is the general overview of the chat box, or you would like to work in the background. Please let us know.
Well, thanks, Javier. I will moderate the chat session, but from now we have any question. I want to ask a question for all the speakers. It's a global question. To introduce the discussion. And my question is if any of you can identify the main contribution that open data platforms can make in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. If you can highlight the main contribution that this kind of tools like the open data platforms can make for us.
Anyone that would like to pitch in is allowed. We are all allowed to pitch in. I think Olga was commenting me before the session that basically the contribution of open data when you try to certify data, it's mostly about differentiating between those data that are more qualitative and those that are like initiatives that have spontaneously responded, but still lack those supervisions that are needed from the principals and also from the authority. Maybe Steve could add something to this, or maybe follow up in the idea.
Yeah, thanks, Javier. Well, in principle, I think open data are really, really important generally. So not just for COVID, but for dealing with all public policy. From my point of view, an interesting issue is really how to make sure we don't allow an asymmetry in open data to evolve. So now we see a lot of pressure being put on public bodies to open their data, which I actually think is a good thing. But at the same time, we shouldn't allow the private sector to escape, where they can just harvest the public sector data for their purposes. So for me, the philosophy behind all of open data should be to try and generate public goods that can be used by individuals, by communities, and also by the private sector. But it shouldn't be lopsided or asymmetric. It should be a kind of a more shared philosophy. But obviously, in doing that, we have to make sure that we respect confidentiality and any other guarantees we've given to the communities that we collect the data from.
And also, I would like to resume or to collect a thought that was in your paper. You say you want a data revolution, that was referred to this condition of contingency of requesting to third parties data. It's not about like we would like that data came from an official characteristic from other parties, but that the situation requires this to be done. Is anyone willing to pitch in about this interesting insight that already Steve shared on the International Association of Official Statisticians journal?
Do you want me
Maybe
to
Enrique
comment?
would like to.
Or
please, Steve.
Well, yeah. The reason we made the argument contingent was because we anticipated nervousness or pushback from the official statistics community. So the argument in the paper is limited to the SDGs, but in actual fact, it could be scalable to any statistics. And because there's a lot of sensitivity around the SDGs about the necessity to use official national data, we took that as our starting point. But in actual fact, if you think through the logic, there's many reasons why you wouldn't do that or you shouldn't do that. But given the sensitivities around this debate, we took that as our start position.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, to come back just 1 second to the open data. I think I used a lot of open data now with COVID, but at the same time we need to pay attention that we need to use scientific data. We need to these open data sometimes are not trustable, and we don't have all the guarantee that of the quality of data, and also the scientificity, because sometime now with COVID, we just listen the number of dead people and affected people every day, but this is not enough. Of course, if a 20 years old die for COVID is something, and we need to know all the pathology and all the problematic, the sickness. But if this person, is 80 years old or 85 years old as well, we need to know all the stuff and how these data are produced. For instance, and I stop all this data we can find in internet, also in open data platform. They say just a number without many specification to have a full analysis.
Okay, interesting discussion. Anyway, you know that our audience is not only on Attendify, but also on the YouTube platform. And I'm getting this question that it is about answering if government can really assure that data, open data would be qualitative. Maybe Olga would like to say something about this.
Yes. Well, to be honest, it's very difficult. It's a long process, expensive process to get the license to certify any product or any service. Within, of course, trust can be ensured through the government process. This is possible And this is something that is doing a difference in many sectors, can get close to the customers, including data customers. So I think yes, it's possible, it works, and it's a very important alternative to help to support the NSOs because they always are saying they have a lot of job, and we think the same. Of course, they have a lot of job, a lot of functions, and certify maybe is not possible to them because they don't have enough resources. So this can help to democratize this function and at the end the data quality.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think the point you raise is really enlightening or really opening of the discussion as well, because the issue there is how do you establish a balance between the need to certify whether open data or whichever other unofficial data uh, related to the authority that will certify. We're pretty sure that it is from the national level that this should come. What we are not totally sure if is this something that should come from only NSOs and the linkage with the EIG SDG Commission, or should it be also an invitation to those general overarching certification organizations that can allow the certification of any quality assurance for that matter? Maybe Steve would like to follow up on this?
Yeah, well, this is the question that Olga has raised, and it's a very interesting one. When we wrote the paper, that had never actually occurred to us. So when I saw our slides, it's a very interesting idea that some other certification body could be involved. I mean, I guess a national statistics office, the issue that they would have, that they'd have to make sure is their independence isn't being compromised. But at the same time, I mean, it's an issue worth exploring. I don't have an answer straight off the top of my head. I'd have to think about it. But certainly, Olga has raised a very interesting question, which I definitely intend to explore. But I guess
I have neither any answer to that. But in the same regard, that probably, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Grace and Beth both kind of touched on this issue a bit as well, so I'd be interested to hear their thoughts.
My opinion, I think if our data, if is involved statistical production, NSO, the National Statistical Office, is independent, is paid from the people, is independent of the politics, the government. Why not the National Statistical Office? They have the knowledge to do, and they have the expertise, and of course they are independent. They of course, in my opinion, they need to take responsibility on that. I am, let's say, angry because they didn't, in some case, they didn't take, in this case, responsibility for the COVID data. If you think, in the most of countries, the data on COVID are not from the National Statistical Office. Why we pay that?
Okay, we have I think a burning question from Mrs. Bediaco from the GSS. If you could show us more your head in frame, it would be great, because we are not seeing you totally. We are seeing your hand raising. So please let us know what you think regarding this interesting reflection from Luca.
Thank you. You know, for National Statistics Office, the issue of trust, someone has mentioned, is important. And partnerships with those who would want to disseminate the information, use the information, put the information out is key. After all, I mean, in most cases, government will have to be comfortable not to censor the data, but we have to know that it is consistent. It is the sources of the data are not such that, I mean, one can really use that information to contradict or undermine the system. So open data must be regulated in a sense. So that's why in the GSS, for example, we have the data quality assurance framework. And much of Africa, we're adopting that because the data must fit into a frame for it to be useful. It's we all agree that it's not every data that is worth going after, even though a lot of data out there would be helpful, like the telecommunication data that we have tried to exploit. It's useful, but the partnership is what made it serve the purpose. So we must build these open data around partnership, solid partnership with the technical expertise that can cross-fertilize and bring out the information. There's a lot of information out there. And if we could harness them in a fruitful way, at least it will also cut the cost of data production for many of us. So I think the whole issue is who are generating the data, how are we partnering, and the technical support to make sure that these data will stand the test of time and can be comparable with other systems that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to you, and really happy that we could discuss this, because this is one of the burning issues that mostly initiatives coming from third party are, which is the openness from NSOs to this possibility. And we really appreciate that your own NSO is open to that. You have already done a great job with the business sector. We would like to propose a contribution from the civil society sector. Would Mrs. Timmers please let us know which is the point of view or your experience regarding the validity, the privacy, the security, and also the final quality of open data that you use in your own tracking progress tool platform?
Yes, Javier, thanks for the question. And I'd also just want to commend Grace Bediaco on that presentation and the work that you've done, sort of opening up NSOs perspectives in Ghana to this real-time data coming from very innovative sources. So I think that in Canada we have a lot to learn from that, and you're at the cutting edge of this type of work. And I would completely agree from the civil society or community perspective that in the same way that you've discussed the importance of partnerships from the perspective of NSOs, those partnerships are equally important that engage civil society or community organizations who might benefit from or might be engaged in collecting data. And the question about certification made me think a lot about this, because I think if there's a sort of top-down certification structure that's coming from an NSO, I think while certification could be important to validate and legitimize data, I think that certain civil society organizations would be as marginalized from this process as they are being from NSO data to begin with, specifically relating to data around groups who are made vulnerable or groups who are oppressed. So I think that the process of certification or that engagement of citizen data must be done in a way that is participatory and really engages civil society organizations or community organizations such that the process is inclusive. And just to cite a few examples of how that has sort of broken down in a Canadian context, when it comes to things like SDG implementation and collecting data related to the SDGs, certain First Nation groups in Canada feel that the way that data is used in a sort of sovereign way is not necessarily included in data collection for SDG implementation in Canada. And that's because the SDG framework is sort of designed outside of those communities and then implemented onto them. So I think having a more inclusive participatory approach altogether is really crucial in all of these discussions.
Okay, thank you for that, Beth. I guess that we are done with all questions, Enrique, according to what you have been sharing through the WhatsApp group we created for the occasion.
Thanks,
Enrique.
Javier. I have two questions from Professor Fang Cheng. One is, I think it's for everybody, for every speaker. Is there any successful case for using the open data platforms in the context of a pandemic? This is the first question of the professor. And the second question is how to deal with and use a lot of open data, especially for developing countries with technology gap. These are the two questions. I don't know if any of you want to answer.
Okay, for everyone, this is already available in the chat boxes. And basically, I think that the second question has been answered partially by Mrs. Beriaco and also by Mrs. Timmers, that how we should include and make inclusive the participation for different sectors and how the partnership should be built up, isn't it? Anyone there?
Well, I guess, Javier, just from a developing country perspective, I mean, one of the worries I have, not necessarily with open data, but with a lot of new digital sources, is that we see in the statistics from ITU, there's a large digital divide across the world and affecting developing countries especially. And my worry is that affects, that digital divide is effectively creating a data divide. And we need to be very careful when we're looking at sources, kind of new data sources, that data divide isn't, just as Beth was explaining, it's not automatically excluding certain communities just because they're not caught up for some reason in a particular technology or a particular type of data collection. So I think we just need to be really careful. And I think that speaks to Luca's point as well. This is what kind of why it's central to have a National Statistical Office involved, because they should be sensitive to these issues. But it's really important going forward that we're more conscious of these issues.
Okay. Yeah. Regarding the first question from Dr. Chan from the Radio University in China, I think this was already collected at the beginning of our session regarding the successful cases where open data worked out. Maybe this is the reason of this question could be because of some technical issues we had at the beginning. But if you check for the recording of this session in the future, you'll find we answered that at the beginning with a fit for purpose table that were those cases reflected, the one from Ghana, but also the one from Colombia, and also the one from Spain, and also the one from Ireland and Eurostat. I think we're done with the time here. Probably will not be on the air right now, but I wouldn't like to wrap up the whole session without saying thank you very, very much for the support we got along all this endeavor. That includes Canal Zoom TV from Colombia, also Global Certificación from Colombia and Mexico, also from the Ghanan Statistical Service, also personally from Enrique Peláez, our care friend and also colleague in CONICET in Argentina, also from the support from the people at the IISD, Beth Zimmer specifically, and also Stephen Junger. And last but not least, Luca Di Gennaro Splendore, that is helping us from Malta and has been really preoccupied about the details of the session. So I really look forward for continuing this collaboration and probably further questions through the chat that people can share spontaneously through these 3 days. And also, and very much importantly, I'm interested in the follow-up that Steve has commented us. If you like to add on this, although we go out of the air right now, we will welcome your words, Steve. We're really
just quickly. So the paper that we published last year, so we published it in the Statistical Journal of the IAOS. The journal has come back and asked us to do a reflection paper 1 year later to see, what was the take up to the idea? Did people like the idea? Did people not like the idea? So we've more or less written the paper and it's been accepted, but I asked the editors, could we wait until the end of the World Data Forum just in case some issues came up that we hadn't included? So for example, I'm kind of keen to talk to our team here between Olga and Beth and Grace, because they've mentioned some things that I would really like to reflect in the follow-up paper before we submit it for final acceptance.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, all right, Steve.
So thanks to all. I have to say just thank you, and hope to see you at Network Data Forum in Bern in Switzerland on the beginning of October 2021. Thanks to everyone.
Let's hope so.
Thanks to all.
Thank you.
Thanks for some canal. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cuando todo esto pase, habremos aprendido de empatía. Sabremos la importancia de darnos la mano sin tocarnos. De cantar desde los balcones y la solidaridad como bandera. Cuando todo esto pase, habremos crecido en familia para un mundo que nos necesita. Veremos la luz del sol con otros ojos, más conscientes, más humanos. Cuando todo esto pase, cuando por fin podamos abrazarnos, cuando nos volvamos